Hello everyone, welcome to the Scumdogs Kennel. I'm your host, Chris Williams, and in today's Cryptid Corner mini episode, today we're talking all about alien visitations. People waking up in their bedrooms and being surrounded or encountering alien beings. I have one reptilian encounter and one with a possible, alien gray hybrid. Both stories are terrifying and, intriguing at the same time. So, let's read the first article. Short, black-eyed, otherworldly female encountered an experiencer's bedroom, and hear all about this fascinating account now. Let's read this brief blurb from the story, folks, before we read the full entry. Because of her human-like appearance, I questioned whether or not this was a full-blooded entity or a hybrid. I had the overwhelming feeling that she was familiar to me and that we were used to each other's presence. So very, as I said, interesting, folks. Let's read the full story now. This occurred near Houston, Texas during the evening of September 24th, 2021. I woke up with my head turned to the side of my bed and opened my eyes to a being about 3 to 3.5 feet tall. The entity appeared to be female in orientation. She had her hair, which appeared to be black, pulled into either a tight bun or a ponytail behind her head. Her skin appeared to be a dark olive tone. She wore clothes, but I don't remember them in detail, though I do remember they were bright yellow. I know she was otherworldly because of her facial features. Her eyes were small and completely black. She did not blink the entire time she was in my presence. Her mouth was lipless and in a straight line on her face. It was also slightly parted. She also had an extremely high cheekbones. So this entity sounds almost fairy-like, folks, as well as basically, like a typical description of a gray alien. Well, basically being small and having black eyes, but that's where it basically ends, folks. And some, fairy stories, folks, are basically in pop culture, fairies have been noted basically as having black eyes like this. So maybe this entity, with her dwarf-like appearance, wasn't an alien hybrid, but that is if you basically believe that, fairies and aliens aren't related in some way, folks, but maybe this was some sort of magical being encounter. She goes on to say that she felt basically familiar with this entity, so let's read that part now, folks, as we get back to the article, and afterwards we can talk about this a little bit more. Her body did not move, but she spoke to me telepathically. I don't remember what she said, but I do recall it was a reprimand of some kind, and that I replied sarcastically. At no point did I feel afraid. My dog also acknowledged the being. After she spoke, I looked to the foot of my bed, where my dog was moving towards me. When I looked back at the being, she stayed visible for about 2 seconds and then disappeared because of her human-like appearance. I wondered whether this was a full-blooded entity or a hybrid. I had the overwhelming feeling that she was familiar to me and that we were used to each other's presence. This is my first memorable run-in with a being. However, I've had several indications that something may be going on. Just over a month ago, for instance, I found a red, freshly healed scoop mark on my inner thigh. That is all that I remember. I have to say, folks, this woman here, and I think it is a woman, the witness, I think that this entity that she met could have been maybe some sort of childhood encounter, perhaps, that she had, but was, for the most part, forgotten from her. I get the feeling that these two beings know each other, and that maybe when she actually encountered this being, on some level, folks, maybe it was like an old friend, because I've seen other stories in which these, very odd entities seem to encounter children or adults, and they basically seem to get along rather well for some reason. So maybe on some level, folks, or at some time, maybe this woman knew this being, but she forgot. Maybe it was erased from her mind. I'm not quite sure. Either way, let's get to our next article, folks. Canadian experiencer horrified by chirping reptilians in her bedroom. Like with the last encounter, folks, that could possibly be an encounter with an alien being, here we have these two reptilian entities basically scaring this woman and basically truly frightening her. Either way, this story is yet another one that I find truly compelling. So let's get into it, and then we'll talk a little more about it after we're finished. The following incident occurred in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, in January 1999 during the late night. Ava Trent had fallen asleep when she awoke to a buzzing sound. Opening her eyes, she was horrified to find two strange creatures standing on either side of her bed. The entity to her right was about 7 to 8 feet tall, weighed about 300 pounds, had apparently no clothing, and seemed to have either crocodile or snake-type skin. The creature to her left was identical in appearance, but smaller in height and weight. They seemed to be communicating in a chirping manner. Each of the entity's eyes glowed. Ava quickly discovered that she was unable to move as she stared at the two creatures. She found that either one of them were giving her instructions telepathically. The nature of this was simply for her to create mental visual scenes of various kinds, and then they proceeded to distort that particular pleasant scene perversely. Apparently, the creatures were intent not only to observe her emotional reaction, but also possibly to feed off the energy that was produced. So, truly terrifying, folks. These creatures sound very similar, well, to vampires, at least a psychic variety. But that is if they were just doing that just to feed folks. But before we consider anything else, folks, we have to consider the fact that the witness thought that they were trying to perform some sort of procedure on her, where they were trying to gauge her emotional state. For what reason, folks? We've seen this with other possible stories in which these beings try to basically inspire fear in people, and basically then, well, gauge the responses one way or the other. Sometimes fear, sometimes outright, well, terror that leads to outright anger, as if they basically want to see these reactions in people, folks. In this case, as we finish off Ava's story, her emotional state is in flux, and it is truly intriguing what she does next, folks. So let's read what she did. After a while, Ava began to mentally resist the mind manipulation and began to pray earnestly. A short time later, she fell back to sleep. The next morning, the witness found 5 of her music tapes grossly distorted, as if extreme heat had been applied. However, no evidence of fire or odor was present. Source: Graham Conway. Interesting article that this Graham Conway here gave us to consider today, folks. Either way, Ava, as you can see, her reaction wasn't basically terror that led to, well, anger, with her basically trying to curse out these beings, folks. No, it was fear that led to her trying to basically pray to God. Now, these beings don't seem to have basically left her as soon as she basically started praying. It seems like she fell asleep, like in some other abduction stories, folks. But in some cases we read before, folks, we've heard people praying to God, and this seems to basically cause these entities to basically go away. But in some cases, folks, and this is why I'm basically saying that in some cases, it feels like these entities are indeed alien, and that praying to God doesn't work. But in some cases it does. So that makes me think that at least some of these stories, folks, that these entities might be some sort of demonic entities, and by praying to God, this seemingly banishes them, folks. Now, that makes me think that, as I said, that some of these entities are indeed something other than alien beings, folks. But in some cases, it feels like these entities don't care if you pray to God or whoever. Like in this one case of an alien abduction, or so-called alien abduction, I remember, folks, in which this man was abducted by these dwarfish beings that resemble literal dwarfs from a fantasy movie like The Lord of the Rings. They abducted this man, and they were questioning him, and, well, he broke down in fear, and he started praying to God. This didn't drive these beings away, folks. In fact, it just seemed to annoy them. And this caused these small beings to basically send this man away because they just basically couldn't stand him anymore. At no point did they actually harm this man. And, well, I could have said that maybe they were going to basically ask this man and maybe make some sort of deal with him because they were basically talking with him and stuff like that. And the only real harm they actually did to him was that they abducted him to begin with so that they could talk to him. So that makes me think that in this case, folks, it could be either demonic or maybe somehow these beings were indeed some sort of alien beings or maybe even real fairies for all I know, folks. Either way, we've read before about how fairies can be driven away by, well, speaking the name of God. So maybe that's why they got rid of them. But it seems like to me that these beings didn't feel at all perturbed with this guy praying to God, as if they, well, didn't care what religion he had or what he was trying to say to them. All they wanted to do was talk to him, and he wouldn't basically abide by that and just started basically, well, screaming the name of God, hoping that they would release him, which is what they did. But it did seem like they were doing it because they were basically being forced by some sort of holy power. It's not that I don't believe in God, folks. I truly do. But I think in some of these cases, demonic entities could pose as, well, alien beings. And alien beings, well, they're probably the ones that aren't affected if you basically pray at them. But then again, maybe I'm wrong, folks. Maybe God would basically repel alien beings too. I just don't know. It's something to think about. In the first case, folks, with the small dwarfish hybrid alien being, as I said, in that case, it really felt like this being was, well, like we were looking at a fairy creature, like we basically just talked about. Either way, maybe that's what she was. But now, folks, we're at the end, so please go subscribe to my YouTube channel, Read Comics That Are Bad For You. You can use the YouTube link down below in the descriptions of the chat to go subscribe to me. I'm Chris Williams from the Scumdogs Kennel. Thank you all for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow with another great video, so be sure to come back again then. Till next time, folks, I'll see you all again soon.